Hello and welcome back everyone, and as promised we will continue to show you the most exciting games out of our chess tournaments. And for today's video we are having round 2 of SuperUnited Croatia Rapid 2024, and we are having Maxime Vachier-Lagrave with the white pieces faced off with Ivan Saric with the black pieces. So let's see how it goes. Well, the game opens up with e4, we've got c5 from, and now we get knight to f3 from Maxime. Now pawn to d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and this is the open Sicilian. And then we get knight to f6 from Ivan Saric, we got knight c3 from MVL, and now we got knight to c6. We got bishop to c4 from MVL, continuing his development, and now we've got e6. This is called the Taimanov variation. Now e6 is the move to block the strength of this bishop, and now we've got bishop to e3 finishing the development for MVL. Now we've got bishop to d7 from Ivan trying to finish his development as well, and now we get queen to e2 from Maxime. Maxime is really tempted to castle queenside or kingside, we don't know yet. So Ivan thought, okay, I will go pawn to a6. The idea behind it is that if white intended to castle, then b5 and b4 are the attack for black is coming very quickly. So Maxime went bishop to b3 just to avoid b5 getting with tempo. So we've got b5 anyways. And now Maxime went a3 to try to prevent the pawn push to b4. So now Ivan goes knight to a5 to try to hit this bishop. Also at the same time, maybe rook to c8 and knight c4 is one of the main ideas for black to hit the b2 pawn and try to get some counter. So Maxime went pawn to f4, also preparing to castle and also trying to play for e5. So Ivan has got to try to stop that, and he went e5 himself. Now the crazy part is that you do not want to capture here as white, because after this trade happens, then you open up this bishop, but also at the same time you remove your knight from e5, but at the most thing that you remove this backward pawn on d6 when you capture. So MVL goes knight to f3 back, but now he is pressurizing and he is attacking the pawn on e5. So Saric is gotta react, because now this bishop is so strong. Maybe ideas like knight to g5 could be so dangerous for white. So he goes knight takes b3, he takes b3, and now queen to b8 from Ivan. Ivan is just trying to defend his pawn on e5 diagonally, and now we got castle from MVL, bishop to e7 to finish his development, to be ready to castle himself. And now b4 may be a little bit annoying at some variations, because you will end up with this triple pawns. So Maxime here went pawn to b4 to fix the pawn on b5 as a weakness if the pawn on a5 moved. But also at the same time, he is trying to dominate the c5 square. Maybe later on the game, he can try to push for that d6 pawn. So Ivan finishes his development and castles kingside. And now we've got f takes e5, d takes e5, and now bishop to c5 from Maxime. Maxime is really trying to make a pass pawn on the queen side. After bishop c5, b takes c5, now he's got a pass pawn on the queen side. And later on he can try to play for b4 and knight to d5, and he's having a really great position. So of course Ivan is understanding that, and he finds himself in a little bit of a trouble. So he played pawn to b4 to hit off this knight, but also at the meantime, if you traded the pawns, then after queen to b4, then the pawn on c5 is under pressure, the pawn on b2 is also under pressure. Keep in mind that bishop to b5 is a little bit annoying at some variations. So after b4 here, MVL goes knight to d5 immediately, because right now if black traded these knights on d5, he will get two connected passed pawns, and of course this will be for sure much better for white. So after knight to d5, we've got bishop to b5 from Ivan Saric going to win, and to will be that a huge decider on the game? We don't know yet. Let's see how it goes. We've got knight takes f6 from MVL, g takes f6, and now we've got queen to e3 to try to sneak in the dark squares right now. Bishop takes f1, rook takes f1, and right now black is up a rook, but there is a huge problem for black that these pawns are doubled. Also keep in mind that this square on f5 is so weak that white can maneuver through and be better at the game. So we've got king to h8, knight to h4 immediately from MVL, rook to g8 to trying to work out this rook from the g file. And now we've got queen to f3 hitting the pawn on f6, but at the same time we are now threatening knight to f5 and queen to h5. So we've got queen to d8 to defend the pawn on f6, and now a takes b4 final. So right now black is up an exchange for a knight and a pawn, but will it be valuable or not? Let's see in just a second. So we've got rook to b8 hitting the pawn on b4. And it can be quite tricky because right now if you lose this pawn, then this pawn will become weakness and this pawn is also going to become a weakness. So you are never really sure what to do as white because it's such a tricky position for you. So Maxime went rook to d1 to hit the queen, to try to put pressure on the pawn on f6 to try to remove this queen. So queen to e7, so the black queen insists to defend the pawn on e7. And now we've got knight to f5, but the main difference that knight to f5 comes now with the tempo hitting the black queen. We've got queen to b7, keeping the eye on the pawn on e4, but at the main time he is attacking the pawn on b4, so it is quite a trick position. So Maxime went knight to e3. Of course, if you take the pawn right now, then queen takes f6 will be a deadly check, since rook to g7 is met with knight to f5, and right now the rook is attacked and you will get in so much trouble as black. So as black cannot take the pawn on b4, so he tries to defend it first by playing rook to g6. So right now the pawn on f6 is defended, so next move black is ready to take the pawn on b4. So Maxime went knight to d5 to keep the pawn on b4, and now Ivan Saric rushes and plays pawn to a5. He is really trying to get any sort of counterplay, as he's a little bit smothered here and pieces are not the best pieces on the board. They're trying to work out the position. Now the engine is saying the best move is pawn to h4, the idea that you sack the pawn on b4 but you get pawn to h5 and rook h6 is forced to keep the pawn defended. But now queen to e3 and you hitting the rook. If the rook now takes the pawn on h5, then knight to f6 will be a huge advantage for white, since rook to d7 is coming and it is really a quite tricky position. At the same time the rook is getting trapped because after rook to h4, then queen to of course not queen to f4, there is going to be queen to g5 and this rook is simply a trapped piece. The only square that could go to is rook to f4, but after rook to d7 hitting the black queen, hitting the black pawn on f7, it will be either a checkmate or black will sacrifice his queen for this rook, therefore white will be winning. But Maxime misses that and went rook to c1 in the game. We've got rook to c8 from Ivan, and right now Maxime realizes it and plays pawn to h4. We've got a takes b4 from Ivan. Ivan is really trying to get any counterplay since his pieces are not really doing that much, and Maxime here goes pawn to h5 and Ivan blunders with rook to 6. What he should have played was rook to g7, because after h6 he will retreat back and in fact he is a little bit better, and after queen takes f6 is not such a huge deal because black gets to play rook to g6 and save this h6. But Ivan misses that and played rook to h6 to keep the pawn defended on f6. But of course that is a little bit odd because there is queen to e3 and the same logic applies again after knight takes f6. It is pretty the same concept discussed. But Maxime here misses it and plays queen to f5, which is considered to be a mistake. We've got rook to c6 from Ivan. Ivan is really trying to defend his weakness on f6. And now we've got knight to e3. Maxime is now trying to reroute his knight to trap this rook on h6. We've got queen to c8 from Ivan, and now pawn g4 from MVL. Pawn to g4 is really such a nice move because it shows you how the understanding of the position works, and the position right now that if black traded the queens, then after knight to f5, then this rook is going to be trapped and it is completely for free. You cannot defend it with king to g7 since the knight is controlling the square of g7. So after pawn to g4, we've got queen to f8 trying to defend this rook from getting trapped. And now Maxime just went slowly king 2. He's making sure that his king is safe. Whenever you capture on c5, I am not in a pinned situation. So we've got rook c5 from Ivan, rook c5 from Maxime, and now queen takes c5. And here it's quite tricky position because of course it is a little bit easier to play for white, but you also as white gotta be careful because if this queen tries to get sent, of course the knight is defending that at the time, But if you try to move your knight, then queen to c2 is going to be such a major problem, and your knight as well as is pinned as white, so you are really not sure what to do here. So Maxime went queen to d7, hitting the pawn on f7, but at the same time maybe he wants to retreat back to try to defend his position. And Ivan, okay, gets so bored, this rook is so trapped, we need to make this rook plays. So he plays pawn to f5. Yes, he sacrifices a huge pawn on f5, but he needs to get his rook into play. So we've got queen to d8 from MVL, king to g7 is forced, and now we've got king to e2 from MVL. Even nicer that he did not capture the pawn on f5. Now you're probably wondering why he didn't just capture the pawn with his pawn, because right now then there is going to be queen to b6, and the black is really defending his position very well with the rook defending the queen. And at the meantime, if he decided to take with the g pawn, then this hangs the pawn on h5, and now rook h2 is coming, and it is a deadly check. So Maxime correctly chooses to play king to e2 to try to run away from any checks from the h file, but at the same time he is unpinning his knight to go knight to f5 check, which is a deadly check, by the way. So we've got rook to f6 from Ivan, and now this was the final blunder. Now you can try to stop the video and try to find out the huge punishment for black here, but I will make it easy for you. Here the best move as Maxime plays is pawn to h6 with check. Now the idea behind it that if you takes with the rook here, then knight takes f5 will lead up to checkmate after king to g6, queen to g8 with check, king to f6, now pawn to g5, king to e6, queen to e8 with check, and now you have to block your queen, and that's checkmate. So you cannot take with the rook, and if you try to take with the king, then queen takes f6, checkmate in one move. To add the game, Ivan Saric went king to g6, trying to hang on a little bit, but Maxime says, I will kill you, and plays queen to g8. Let's try to just checkmate you. King takes h6 was played, and now pawn to g5. King to h5 was played, and after g takes f6, Ivan Saric here resigns the game, and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave won with a great game with the white pieces to move on the tournament with 2 out of 2. A great score for Maxime and great play for all. Now, if you like the video, make sure to check our latest video. Was also a Maxime game, but versus Levon Aronian, such a stronger opponent than Ivan Saric. Make sure to check it out and see you in the next videos analyzing the tournament. Goodbye.